I always believed that a man's greatest enemy wasn't the one standing in front of him. It was the one smiling beside him while holding a knife behind his back. I built my life on that principle, climbing my way to the top in the world of business, outmaneuvering rivals, and crushing competition with calculated precision. Yet, for all my wisdom, I never saw it coming from my own wife, Laura, the woman I had given everything to. It started with the small things. She'd come home late, blaming it on dinners with friends. Her phone, once left casually on the kitchen counter, was now always face down, locked tight, buzzing with unread messages. The intimacy between us had faded, replaced by forced smiles and distant stares. I should have confronted her sooner, should have put an end to it before it spiraled. But I waited. Maybe because some part of me didn't want to believe it. Maybe because I wanted to be sure. Then, one evening, I got my answer. It was a business gala, one of those high-profile events where men in tailored suits sipped expensive whiskey and discussed deals worth millions. Laura had excused herself early, claiming she was feeling unwell. An hour later, one of my men, Marcus, my personal security detail, sent me a picture. A single image that shattered any illusions I had left. Laura, in a dimly lit bar across town. Sitting beside him, Ryan Holloway. I recognized him immediately, a smug, younger man, maybe early 30s, dressed like he thought he was the next big thing. The kind of guy who thought his youth and charm could get him anywhere. I had heard his name before, some small-time entrepreneur trying to break into the industry. I had never paid him any attention, but now he had mine. In the picture, Laura was laughing, her hand resting on his thigh. It wasn't an accident, wasn't some innocent misunderstanding. It was intimacy. It was betrayal. I left the gala without a word, the sound of polite chatter and clinking glasses fading behind me. In the back of my car, I stared at that picture, feeling something inside me snap. Not sadness, not heartbreak. Those were emotions for men who lost. No, I felt rage. At first, I told myself I'd walk away. What was the point? I had power, money, influence. Women threw themselves at me all the time. I could replace Laura in a heartbeat. If she wanted to be with some worthless kid, let her. I had no time for foolishness. But then Ryan made his mistake. It started with a message. My phone buzzed late that night. I glanced at the screen. Unknown number. I opened it. She was mine the moment she saw me. Maybe you should just accept it and move on, old man. I stared at the words, feeling my grip tighten around the phone. Then another message followed. You don't deserve a woman like her. I do. You should do yourself a favor and stay in your place. I exhaled slowly, my jaw clenched. The arrogance. The audacity. This wasn't just an affair anymore. It was a challenge. Ryan wasn't just sleeping with my wife. He was mocking me, daring me. He thought I was some weak man, someone he could push around, someone who would just roll over and accept it. He had no idea who he was dealing with. I had built my empire from nothing, turned a small investment into a fortune that men twice my size feared. I had seen rivals try to take me down and watched as they crumbled under the weight of their own mistakes. And now, a cocky little parasite thought he could steal from me and walk away laughing? No, I wasn't just going to take my revenge. I was going to make him regret ever crossing my path. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. My mind was already working, piecing together the next steps. A simple confrontation wouldn't do. I didn't want a scene, didn't want to play the role of the scorned husband yelling in the streets. That wasn't my style. No, if I was going to strike, I'd do it my way. Quiet, ruthless, unforgettable. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Well, if it isn't James Carter, the voice drawled. Didn't think I'd be hearing from you again. I need a favor, I said, my voice calm, controlled. A short pause. Then, a low chuckle. Oh, the kind of favor that leaves bruises? I smiled coldly. Something like that. Who's the target? His name's Ryan Holloway. Another pause. Consider it done. As I ended the call, I glanced at my phone one last time, rereading Ryan's messages. I typed a reply. Enjoy the fun while it lasts, because soon it won't be fun anymore. Then I shut my phone off, leaned back in my chair, and waited. Because by the time the sun rose again, Ryan Holloway's world was about to change, and he wouldn't even see it coming. There's a certain kind of power that doesn't come from wealth or influence. It comes from fear. Fear is a language, one that men like Ryan Holloway don't understand until it's spoken to them in a way they can't ignore. I wasn't going to kill him. That would be too easy. No, I wanted him to wake up every morning knowing he had made the biggest mistake of his life. I wanted him to feel a kind of fear that would never leave him. And I knew just the men who could deliver that message. I arrived at the Rusted Nail, a dive bar on the outskirts of town, just past midnight. The place reeked of spilled beer, smoke, and desperation. A neon sign flickered above the entrance, casting a sickly red glow on the cracked pavement. Inside, the air was thick with tension. The kind of place where one wrong look could end a man's night or his life. And at the farthest booth, surrounded by men who lived outside the rules of society, sat Dante, Reaper Valenti. Dante wasn't just a biker. He was a king among outlaws. Leader of the Iron Reapers, a gang known for making problems disappear in ways the law couldn't touch. I had done business with him before, years ago, when a competitor thought he could play dirty. Dante handled the problem, and in return, I owed him. But now, it was time to cash in my favor. He looked up as I approached, a slow smirk spreading across his scarred face. He was built like a wrecking ball, tattoos creeping up his neck, his knuckles bruised from whatever poor soul had pissed him off earlier. Well, well, he drawled, knocking back a shot of whiskey. If it isn't James Carter himself, to what do I owe the honor? I slid into the seat across from him, meeting his dark gaze without hesitation. I have a problem, I said evenly, and I need you to fix it. Dante chuckled, glancing around at his men before leaning forward. You? With a problem? That's rare. He took another sip. Tell me about it. I pulled out my phone, scrolled to the picture Marcus had sent me of Laura and Ryan at the bar, and slid it across the table. Dante's eyes flickered over the screen. Your wife. Ex-wife soon enough. He nodded approvingly. And the little prick sitting next to her? His name is Ryan Holloway. He thinks he's untouchable. I want you to remind him he's not. Dante grinned, a slow, predatory expression. How bad? I took a moment before answering. I want him to wake up in the hospital wondering if he'll ever walk the same way again. I want his hands to shake every time he sees a motorcycle. And I want him to never threaten me again. Dante let out a low whistle. So, you don't want him dead? I shook my head. No, that would be too easy. I want him to suffer. Dante leaned back, studying me. You know, once we start this, there's no taking it back. I met his gaze, unflinching. I never take back my decisions. That was all the confirmation he needed. Dante knocked on the table twice, and his second-in-command, Axel, a hulking brute with a buzz cut and a wicked scar running down his cheek, stepped forward. Ryan Holloway, Dante said, tossing my phone to him. Find out everything about him. Where he drinks, where he sleeps, what his weaknesses are. Axel nodded. Consider it done. Dante turned back to me. We'll make sure he remembers your name. Loud and clear. I stood up. Good. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a thick envelope, sliding it across the table. A bonus. For making it memorable. Dante grinned as he took it. Pleasure doing business with you, Carter. I walked out of the Rusted Nail, my mind clearer than it had been in weeks. Ryan Holloway had played with fire, and by the time the sun rose, he was going to burn. That night, the Iron Reapers got to work. They were ghosts, moving through the city without a trace, gathering everything they needed to know. Ryan was predictable, cocky men like him always are. He had his routines, his favorite places. A gym where he preened in front of the mirror, a club where he flaunted his ego, a sleek penthouse apartment where he took women who thought his confidence meant he was worth something. And more importantly, he was reckless. Axel reported back the next morning. He drinks at the Velvet Room every Thursday night. Likes to show off, make a scene. Perfect place to grab him when he's not expecting it. Dante nodded, turning to me. You sure you don't want to be there to watch? I smirked. No need. Just make sure he understands the lesson. Dante chuckled, slapping a hand on my shoulder. Oh, don't worry. By the time we're done, he won't need a second lesson. Ryan Holloway had no idea what was coming as I sat in my office later that day. Overlooking the city I had conquered, I thought about Ryan. I imagined him laughing, bragging to his friends about how he had taken James Carter's wife, about how he had taunted me, mocked me. He thought he had one. But the thing about men like Ryan, they never see the fall coming until it's too late. And by tomorrow night, Ryan Holloway would know exactly what it meant to cross me. Some men think they're invincible. They walk through life untouched, convinced that the rules don't apply to them. Ryan Holloway was one of those men. Cocky, reckless, and stupid. He thought stealing another man's wife made him powerful. He thought sending me threats made him dangerous. Tonight, he was going to learn what real power looked like. It was Friday night, and the neon lights of the Velvet Room glowed against the wet pavement, painting the street in shades of red and purple. Inside, the bass pulsed through the walls like a heartbeat, the air thick with expensive cologne, perfume, and the stale scent of greed. Ryan Holloway sat at the VIP section, lounging like a king. He had his arms draped over two women, laughing, drinking, completely unaware that the walls were already closing in. Dante's men had been watching him for days, learning his habits, tracking his movements. Ryan was predictable. He came to this club every week, ordered the same overpriced whiskey, made the same arrogant gestures, and picked up the same kind of women, ones who mistook confidence for power. But tonight was different. Tonight, the Iron Reapers were waiting. Ryan stood from his booth, stretching, completely unaware that he was walking straight into hell. He stepped out the back exit, heading toward the alley where his car and private driver were waiting. The club's back entrance was isolated. No security cameras, no streetlights. Just shadows and silence. The perfect place to send a message. As soon as the heavy steel door swung shut behind him, the air shifted. A presence. A threat. Ryan barely had time to register it before the first fist landed. A brutal, crushing blow to his stomach sent him staggering back. He gasped, doubling over. But before he could react, Axel was on him. A second punch, this one to the ribs. The crack was sickening, echoing through the empty alley. Ryan let out a strangled curse, trying to push away, but the Iron Reapers didn't give him space to breathe. Two more men emerged from the darkness, stepping in front of the exit. No escape. Ryan was trapped. Ryan, still gasping from the pain in his ribs, made a mistake. Instead of begging, instead of running, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a knife. A weak, desperate attempt at control. Dante, standing just a few feet away, laughed. A cold, humorless sound. You think that little blade is gonna save you? Dante took a slow step forward, his boots crunching against the pavement. Boy, you have no idea who you pissed off. Ryan lunged. A mistake. Axel caught his wrist mid-air, twisting it violently. Another sickening crack. The knife clattered to the ground, and Ryan howled in pain. Then the real beating began. A fist to his jaw, snapping his head sideways. A knee to his gut, driving the air from his lungs. A boot to his ribs, making sure those bones would never feel the same again. Ryan collapsed, coughing blood, his body trembling from shock. His right hand, the one that had held the knife, was now bent at an unnatural angle, useless. Dante crouched beside him, grabbing his hair and yanking his head up so their eyes met. You thought you could mess with James Carter and walk away? Dante's voice was quiet, but there was a lethal edge to it. You thought you could threaten a man like him? Ryan groaned. His lips stained red. His arrogance had shattered. Now, there was only fear. Dante leaned in closer, his breath hot against Ryan's ear. Consider this mercy. Then, with one final blow, a savage punch to Ryan's face, he was out cold. Dante stood, wiping his hands on his jeans as he turned to his men. Leave him here. Let him crawl back to whatever hole he came from. The bikers nodded, stepping back as Ryan lay broken and bleeding on the pavement. His expensive suit was ruined, his face swollen, his body shaking from pain. Dante pulled out his phone and sent a single message. It's done. James Carter had one. Ryan Holloway had just learned the cost of arrogance. And the best part? This was only the beginning. Some men don't understand consequences until they're on the ground, coughing up blood. Ryan Holloway was one of those men. And some women only regret their choices when it's too late. Laura was one of those women. The grandfather clock in my study read 12:47 a.m. when I heard the pounding at my front door. Not a polite knock. Not a hesitant tap. Desperate. Panicked. I already knew who it was. I took my time, pouring myself a drink, letting her sweat it out a little longer. She deserved that much. When I finally opened the door, Laura stood there, drenched in tears, her mascara running, breathless from what was probably the fastest drive of her life. Her hands were shaking, her hair a mess, and her expensive silk blouse was wrinkled like she hadn't even thought before throwing it on. This wasn't the proud, put-together woman I had once married. This was a woman in complete panic. "James," she gasped, clutching my wrist. "Please, you have to stop this. Please." I leaned against the doorframe, taking a slow sip of my whiskey. "Stop what, exactly?" "Don't play games," she snapped, her voice breaking. "Ryan. He's in the hospital. They broke his ribs. His hand, he might never." She choked on her words. I watched her crumble, watched her finally understand what it felt like to lose control. Good. I set my glass down on the table beside me, then folded my arms. "And?" I asked, my voice as cold as the night air. Laura's breath hitched. "What do you mean, and?" "I mean, why are you here, Laura?" I tilted my head slightly. "Are you asking me to feel bad for him? Are you asking me to stop what I've already set in motion?" She flinched at my tone. For the first time, she was scared of me, and I liked it. Laura dropped to her knees. Right there, in the middle of my doorway, the woman who had once promised to love me, the woman who had betrayed me, was now begging. "James," she whispered, gripping my hands. "Please. You have to stop this. Ryan, he's not a bad person. He didn't deserve this." I yanked my hands away, stepping back. "Not a bad person?" I repeated, my voice laced with amusement. "That's funny. You know what's really funny, Laura? I was sitting in this house, minding my own business, when I started getting texts from your little boy toy." Her lips parted, confusion flashing in her wet, red-rimmed eyes. "You didn't know, did you?" I continued, reaching into my pocket. "Here, let me refresh your memory." I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the messages, the threats, the taunts, the arrogance. Then I held the screen up to her face. Laura read them. Her face drained of color. She covered her mouth with both hands as her eyes darted over Ryan's words. "You're a joke, Carter. Maybe if you were a real man, she wouldn't be in my bed. You should just stay in your place and move on. Or else, try something, and I'll show you who the real boss is." She let out a strangled sob. I smirked. Did he sound so tough when he was on the ground coughing up blood? Laura shook her head violently. "No, no, no. He was just angry, James. He didn't mean those things. He was just being stupid. And stupidity has consequences." I grabbed my whiskey again and took another slow sip, watching as the reality of the situation sank in for her. She hadn't known about the messages. She thought Ryan was just some victim, caught in the crossfire. Now she knew he had started this war, and I had finished it. Laura changed tactics. I'll leave him, she blurted. I'll end it. I swear. Just don't let this go any further. I stared at her, amused. You think this is about you? I scoffed. You think this was about getting you back? Her lips parted, but she said nothing. I don't care about you, Laura, I said, stepping closer, my voice deadly quiet. I stopped caring the second you threw away everything we built together for a cheap thrill with a boy who thought he could step into my world and walk away unscathed. She blinked, as if trying to process my words. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. I'm not stopping. Not yet. Terror flickered across her face. She knew. She knew this wasn't just about Ryan's broken ribs and shattered hand. This wasn't over. Laura stood up slowly, wiping her tears. You're enjoying this, she whispered. Aren't you? I didn't answer. Because the truth? I was. She let out a hollow laugh, shaking her head. I can't believe I ever loved you. I smiled. Cold. Calculated. You should have loved me better. Her body stiffened. Silence stretched between us, thick with all the things we both knew could never be undone. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. As the door swung shut behind her, I downed the rest of my whiskey and picked up my phone. I dialed Dante. His voice was sharp, awake, waiting. Keep the pressure on him, I said. Ryan's not done learning his lesson. Dante chuckled darkly. That's what I like to hear. I ended the call and exhaled. Laura thought this was over. She thought walking away from Ryan was enough. But this wasn't about love anymore. This was about punishment. And I wasn't finished yet. Some men learn their lessons the hard way. Ryan Holloway? He was the kind of idiot who needed the lesson beaten into him a few times before it actually sank in. After the Iron Reapers left him bloodied in the alley, I assumed he'd crawl back into whatever hole he came from, lick his wounds, move on. But no, Ryan was stubborn. Stupidly, suicidally stubborn. And now? He was about to pay the real price. It started 2 nights after Laura's pathetic plea. I was sitting in my office, reviewing some investment reports, when my phone rang. It was Bryce, my head of security. Sir, we've got a situation. I leaned back in my leather chair, already annoyed. Talk. There's been an incident at one of your dealerships. That got my attention. Bryce continued, his voice sharp and controlled. For masked men broke in after midnight. Smashed windows, slashed tires, spray-painted threats on the walls. They set a few cars on fire before the cops showed up. No one got caught, but we've got security footage. I drummed my fingers on my desk. What did they spray? Bryce hesitated for a second. Then he said, Stay in your place, Carter. Or else. I smiled. A slow, dangerous smile. Ryan, that idiot still had some fight left in him. I almost admired his determination. If it wasn't so incredibly stupid. I checked my watch. 2:30 a.m. I picked up my phone, dialed Dante Valeni, and waited as the call connected. He answered after 2 rings. Tell me you've got a job for me, Carter, Dante's gravelly voice said. Oh, I do, I replied, my voice smooth as silk. Ryan made his move. Dante laughed. That kid just doesn't know when to quit. No, he doesn't, I agreed. But I want to teach him something new. We already broke his body. This time, we break something worse. And what's that? His money. Ryan thought he could play in my world and come out untouched. He didn't understand something. I don't get mad. I get even. And Dante? He knew exactly how to destroy a man from the inside out. That morning, the Iron Reapers got to work. They didn't use fists. They didn't use bats or knives. They used fear. By noon, they had paid visits to Ryan's business partners, reminding them, very politely, that Ryan was a problem they didn't want to be associated with. Made some calls to his suppliers, letting them know it would be in their best interest to cut ties. Had a friendly chat with his landlord, who suddenly decided that Ryan's rent was going up tenfold. One by one, his financial lifelines snapped. By the end of the week, Ryan was in freefall. Ryan must have thought his name meant something. He must have thought he was untouchable. But when his bank account started bleeding, he panicked. His phone calls went unanswered. His business partners ghosted him. His clients backed out of deals. And when he tried to apply for a loan, well, let's just say the banks suddenly saw him as high risk. Poor Ryan. He had no idea that his entire world had quietly crumbled around him. Until it was too late. The best part? I didn't have to do anything. I just waited. And then, 2 weeks later, the headlines told me everything I needed to know. Ryan Holloway's business empire crumbles amidst financial crisis. Holloway assets frozen as partners pull out. Young entrepreneur Ryan Holloway falls from grace. Oh, how I savored those words. I even framed one of the articles. Not because I cared about Ryan, but because it was proof. Proof that when you come for me, I don't just beat you. I erase you. Ryan tried to fight it. He begged his connections to help him. He called in every favor he was owed. But no one answered. By the end of the month, he had lost everything. No money. No influence. No power. Just regret. Regret for threatening me. Regret for taking what was mine. Regret for ever thinking he could play in a world that wasn't built for men like him. I imagined him, sitting alone in some rundown apartment, his ribs still aching, his hand barely functional, staring at the wreckage of what used to be his life. It must have been humiliating. It must have been devastating. And the best part? I wasn't even done yet. Ryan Holloway had lost his body. He had lost his business. Now, it was time for Laura to lose everything, too. There's a certain satisfaction in watching a traitor realize they've lost everything. That moment when reality crashes down, when all their arrogance turns to dust, that's the real victory. Laura thought she could cheat on me and still land on her feet. She thought she'd walk away unscathed. She was wrong. Because now, it was my turn to watch her fall. I didn't waste time. While Ryan was drowning in financial ruin, I was sitting across from my lawyer, Declan Myers, a man so ruthless in legal matters that even sharks feared him. Declan glanced over the divorce documents and smirked. She gets nothing. I nodded. That was the deal from the start. Laura had signed a prenup the day we got married. Not a flimsy, easily challenged one. An ironclad, bulletproof prenup. If she cheated, she walked away with nothing. No house, no car, no alimony, nothing. And now, that little piece of paper was going to be her downfall. File it, I told Declan. He chuckled. Oh, this is going to be fun. And just like that, Laura Carter's comfortable life was over. 2 days later, she showed up at my office. Not the mansion, not calling, not texting. She had the audacity to march straight into my corporate headquarters, past my assistants, past security, straight to my door. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. She probably hadn't. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed, watching her. James, she breathed. Please, don't do this. I didn't say a word. She stepped closer, placing the divorce papers on my desk. I can't lose everything, she whispered. I was stupid. I messed up, but you can't just throw me away like this. I tilted my head. Can't I? Her lips trembled. I made a mistake. I laughed, low, slow, amused. A mistake? Laura, you didn't trip and fall into another man's bed. She flinched. You didn't just cheat, I continued. You chose to betray me, over and over again. And now, you're living with the consequences. Tears welled in her eyes. James, please. I love you. I smiled. A slow, cold, merciless smile. No, I said softly. You loved what I gave you. The mansion, the luxury, the power. Her hands clenched into fists. You can't do this. I was your wife. You were my wife, I corrected. And now? You're nothing. Her eyes darted to the papers again. They're final, Laura, I told her. Sign them, or don't. Either way, you're leaving with nothing. Her face twisted. Anger, regret, humiliation. all at once. "This isn't fair," she spat. I arched a brow. Fair? She actually had the nerve to say that? I stood up, leaning in just enough to make sure she heard every word. "You made your choice, Laura," I murmured. "Now live with it." She inhaled sharply, shoulders shaking. And then she grabbed the pen and signed. Her defeat was absolute. She walked out of my office like a ghost. No pride left. No fight left. She knew she had lost. I exhaled, watching the city skyline from my window, feeling the weight of it all settle. Ryan was ruined. Laura was disgraced. And me? I was free. Free to move on. Free to live my life without traitors dragging me down. I picked up the divorce papers and tucked them into a folder. And just as I did, my phone buzzed. A text from Dante. "It's done. Ryan's got nothing left. He's crawling, begging. Fun to watch." I smirked. Good. They wanted to play games. Now, they could play in the dirt. I stepped out of my office, nodding to my assistant. "Tell Declan to finalize the paperwork." And just like that, Laura Carter became history. Some men are meant to be feared. Others? They learned the hard way why they should be. Ryan Holloway and Laura Carter? They belonged in the second category. And now? They were nothing but a memory. Ryan used to be cocky, loud, arrogant, fearless. He thought he could take another man's wife and walk away unscathed. He thought he could send threats to the wrong person and still sleep peacefully at night. Now, Ryan Holloway was a ghost of himself. His ribs were still cracked. His right hand? Permanently damaged. His business? Gone. His confidence? Destroyed. He had nothing left but regret. I heard from Dante that Ryan had tried to plead with his old business partners, but no one wanted to be associated with him anymore. The same man who once mocked me was now crawling for scraps. Poetic justice. I didn't need to lift another finger. Ryan had already buried himself. Laura thought Ryan was worth it. Worth betraying our marriage. Worth throwing away the life I built for her. But in the end, Ryan couldn't even protect himself. And when she saw him broken and useless, reality hit her like a sledgehammer. I never saw her again after she signed those divorce papers. Some said she left town. Others said she tried to rebuild her life, only to realize that no one wanted a woman who had lost everything. Maybe she went looking for another man to leech off of. Maybe she finally understood that she had bet on the wrong horse. Didn't matter. She was out of my life. For good. The night was warm, the city lights glittering like diamonds. I sat in my private lounge, a glass of whiskey in hand, savoring the silence. No chaos, no betrayal, no loose ends, just peace. I raised my glass, smirking to myself. To victory. The golden liquid burned smooth down my throat, but the fire in my chest wasn't from the whiskey. It was from winning. I had come out of this stronger, smarter, untouchable. Ryan? A broken man. Laura? A forgotten mistake. Me? Still standing. Because some men? They don't fall. They make others kneel. And that's exactly what I did. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more thrilling tales. Let me know your thoughts below. What would you have done in James's shoes? Stay tuned for the next gripping story. Until then, remember, some victories are earned, and some mistakes are never forgiven. See you soon.